Hello, you're listening to Me and Paranormal You with your host, Ryan Singer. Because it's more fun to believe. Hey, everybody. Thank you for listening to another experience of Me and Paranormal You. This is your buddy, Ryan Singer. I'm excited because someone who's been haunting me is back on the program. I can't believe it's been just over 6 years since author, naturalist, thought leader Bernie Taylor, author of Before Orion and also Biological Time, and not another book. Listening to our last conversation, you were pretty adamant that Before Orion was going to be your last book. We're going to follow up on that and see if you still think that's the case. But Bernie, so good to see you, man. How you doing?
I'm doing great here. So our hair is kind of both disheveled today. I'm looking at you. With yours is dirt. Now I have a reason because I woke up this morning and my neck and my shoulder were kind of cramped, like super cramped. And so it must have been like the anxiety of coming on the program today. So
Oh,
I go
yeah.
online, I go online, try to get my normal physical therapist, my regular. She's awesome, like the miracle worker. And she had no slots at 9 o'clock this morning. So I go online, found a strip mall massage therapist. Now, when you go to the strip mall for anything, you sort of have to worried about it. So you can get a tie with two wide ends. So go to the strip mall massage therapist, and they've got six pages of releases. I'm basically giving anything that happens to me, they're not responsible, but I'm responsible if anything happens to them. So I go in. It's a real nice woman, and she starts out, the light kneading, right? And then she gives a little elbow, and it's just still not happening. Then she gets on the table, she starts doing the knee, the knee in my back, my shoulder, and it's starting to feel good. I said, I feel, we're making progress. She says, okay, we're going to the next step. She puts her foot into me, boom, on my back. And an hour later, I'm just ready for the show. Actually, I need a little ibuprofen, but then I'm ready for the show. And thanks to the anxiety that I had last night from coming on the show today. Thanks, Ryan.
Well, I'm happy to have you on the show. I am apologetic to a certain degree about the anxiety that you felt coming on the show, but maybe you found a new great backup spot for some massage therapy as a result. So, I
Foot job.
I tell you the idea too that just the idea of something, right? I mean, this is actually kind of a good lead in. The idea of something taking physical form, right? And like the power of the mind. And in our previous conversation, I want people to know you can go back, and I implore you, please go back and listen to Experience 212. I believe it was in February of 2018. You have to listen to the first conversation we had because it was incredible. And the groundbreaking, the information, just, I mean, talking about the constellations being mirrored in this cave art that's, 35, 40,000 years old.
Yeah.
The hero's journey, the monomyth, Joseph Campbell, but actually playing out in this cave art, showing that there's a bridge between different parts of the world, that this was an actual journey, not only being depicted, but actually a journey that happened because of the things specific to the artwork in the cave. And not to mention the draft, I believe Marjorie, my
Yes, your
grandmother's
grandmother,
name.
your mother is in the book. Yes,
So,
it's yeah.
um, so just incredible stuff. I mean, what a cool chat we had. And we didn't even really talk about Picasso last time. And I also want to talk about some of your newer work and things like that, specifically getting into the neurodiversity work that and diving into that subject matter a little bit. I mean, because we touched on it very, very briefly, because I think at one point you asked me if I had children, and in our first chat, and about you know the neurodivergent world, according to you, was something that our ancestors were aware of. Is that fair to say?
It's fair. Absolutely. They were not concerned with math. and writing of language as we do it today, for sure.
Yeah, and so I think that could be interesting to get into specifically about Picasso as well, because his father
Mm,
was an art teacher, and because I think the way you described it previously was really fascinating. It was how in these streams of the streams of our ancestry and DNA, how do we separate these singular raindrops that might be these traits, like a
mm,
like a brilliant artist like Picasso,
mm,
or an outside thinker, like Nikola Tesla, or
mm,
how do we separate those raindrops? And
mm.
I think I don't know if you've gotten any closer to answering that, or if it's just kind of an
Mhm.
instinctual thing.
It's been something I've been studying for a long time. And Native Americans of the Pacific Northwest answered the question that the teacher of the child or the apprentice was always the uncle, because you always know who the mother is, but you don't always know who the father is. If you know who the mother is, then you know who the brother is, and then you know who the uncle is. And so the first time I expressed that to a Native American, you know, through his own tradition. He said, I know my father is. Okay, I know your father is. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
But how you pass down a tradition is through the mother and the uncle as the teacher. Because that's when you truly know you have the genetics. And how you keep those genetics in the stream of of the humanity is to continually test the apprentice. You test the apprentice by bringing them in front of the cave wall, and they have to answer the questions. They have to answer questions that they don't even know what the question is, because the question is the image before them.
That's interesting, and it's an initiation. It's a rite of passage, right?
Absolutely. Oh, totally. And so what we find is throughout the Upper Paleolithic, we find these images. You have two levels of awareness. Actually, there's multiple levels of awareness, but the two dominant ones are you have um, a a positive figure. So if you put your hand out there and you drew between your fingers, you'd have the positive figure. But then there's always the negative figure, and the negative figure is the opposite side of the hands. So another character will fit into those hands. Between that one hand, that becomes your negative space. And so it's about seeing it's two perspectives at the same time. And that another thing they do is entirely, of course, with the cave art, is you have in that positive image, it'll typically be red or black, some deeply etched lines that first draw your attention. And the negative space will be something very slight. It might be a change of coloration. And so you're tested to look, can you see the trees through the forest? Because the positive space would be the trees, and the forest, and the negative space would be the trees. Can you see those? And it's the negative space is where you truly see the incredible image. You just see, these avian characters, human, animal, or I guess what humans are animal too, but the integration of the beast and the human, right? And you also see anthropologic figures. You see the wind come alive. The wind have a face, and you see sort of elvish characters. You see the integration of all the cosmos, and that's in the negative space. But that's not what you first see when you come. Most people come and look at the panels or look at the images as I've studied them, both in the caves and at the through the high resolution photos.
Yeah, and
So are you ready
specific.
for
Yeah,
negatives? So you're okay with the concept of negative space now, right?
yeah, I think so. And just specifically in before Orion, it's El Castillo Cave, right? Is
mm,
the Gallery of Discs, and specifically, that was like the launch point for this, right? Just as a
yeah,
brief,
no, yeah, that
brief
was a long time.
recap. Yeah. So
That was clear,
okay.
yeah.
Yeah, and so just to I mean, we talked a little bit about kind of turning the world upside down a little bit, which I think
Mm,
is apropos when we're talking about negative space.
mm,
When it comes to the way you approach this and the way what you figured out was happening here
mm,
in in this artwork when everyone was obsessed with the red dots, and that's the thing that draws the attention, right? And then boom, then now you've got negative space, you've got interlocking, overlapping images, all
mm,
kinds of things. So yeah, there's So let's pull the thread on the negative space a little more then.
Mhm.
Uh,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead. What are your thoughts on that?
So I visited the El Castillo cave this past September and other caves in northern Spain. As Helen and I, it was a fascinating trip. The Spanish food is incredible. We went to Madrid and saw Guernica, all that sort of stuff. Recommend to everybody in the world. And every cave you go into northern Spain, the guide says the same thing. The guide says that there are human images, there are animal images, and there are geometric patterns that nobody will ever know because we can't get into the mind of these Paleolithic people. So what they did was they said, well, there's no mountains. There's no integration of humans and animals. They said there's no flora. I mean, they said there's no plants. I mean, this is loaded with plants, absolutely loaded with plants, which tell the seasonality of the images. And the images themselves, the animals and the humans are constellations. So we know they're constellations, or we can identify them as constellations because the same constellations, the same characters, and the same order as the Greeks had. So the Greeks inherited them from the Upper Paleolithic cave artists. I don't know, it was the Greeks that went to the caves because the Greeks actually we have a record that the Greek astronomy came from Egypt through the Greek Eudoxus at the same time as Plato. Interesting. So Plato went to Egypt, came back with a story of this great lost civilization. Okay. Eudoxus goes to Egypt at the same time, different priests, and comes back with this story, and actually a different night sky, this night sky with all these animals, all these plants, all these integrated humans, animals that became Greek astronomy. Two people came back, were told the same thing. One came back with a lost civilization, and the other came back with incredible astronomy. It's interesting too, and that'll happen, of course, to Alexander the Great had opened up the world, is because that's the heirs of it. So this story, this narrative, is of lost civilizations in a way, um, and lost that the Greeks found either directly or through some independent, maybe the Phoenicians, don't know, and it tells a story of the integration of the Mediterranean, um, the greater Mediterranean. But something happened last year, last June. It happened in South Africa. It happened at the Rising Star Cave, and everybody can look at the Cave of Bones on Netflix. I think it's part of a series, but it was one part with Lee Berger. And it's about a 2 hour program. And in this program, Lee Berger goes into this cave that he had been excavating for 8 years, but he had never been down into there. His team was in the cave. And he says that he has this, Queen's Gambit moment where, flashing lights and stuff, and he sees the engravings on the wall. And he said, these engravings. But for 9 years, people had walked right. His team had walked right by there and never saw these engravings. So he said, well, this is some sort of hallucinogenic vision. And they're right over the graves of alleged graves of these Homo naledi people from 300,000 years ago. Therefore, they were made in conjunction with Homo naledi. Well, I studied those images, and I'm going to tell you they have nothing to do with Homo naledi. But what I did find is that they overlap with the Iberian cave images, which is amazing. Now, on the Iberian cave gallery of disc, we have a giraffe. And years ago, when I was working on that was back about 2014. I was working with George Schauer, who was the world's foremost wildlife biologist, the mentor of Jane Goodall. You kind of put the rankings in there, right? And George said that that's a Maasai giraffe on the gallery of discs. And so we kind of muddled over a little bit, and Maasai giraffes are in South Africa. And so we were good with Maasai giraffes having migrated into North Africa, just on the other side of the Strait of Gibraltar, where these cave artists in Spain, Iberian Peninsula, could have seen them. We were just fine with that. Um, but it didn't work out the whole constellation thing. In fact, I gave lots of presentations to astronomers, and I show all these constellations and the same as the Paleolithic ones, and I just skip by the giraffe because I didn't know what it was. I just didn't know. Well, the giraffe shows up in the same order on the Cave of Bones, South Africa engravings. It's the same giraffe.
In the
And so I sort of
South Africa,
South Africa. It was South Africa.
the other
Yeah,
side of the
South.
continent.
Yeah, it's yes. And it shows up. And I'm like, wow, that's George's Maasai giraffe. And it just totally blew my mind. So I thought I don't think I knew everything. But 7 years ago, I mean, I was at the top of the game on this thing. And another image flashes across my screen. It's all you can see it on Netflix of this Maasai giraffe. And not only is that Maasai giraffe on the image on the engraving, but we can find the pareidolia, the outside the cave origin of that Maasai giraffe too, at a place called Sentinel Peak. And it's basically a huge giraffe. It's a huge giraffe in this mountain. Of course, it's pareidolia. So there's team Giants should be all over this one. But I'm not on Team Giants, but it's pareidolia, the mountain that it's south facing. It's exactly the same as the gallery of discs. So a year ago, by fluke, Lee Berger, in his hallucinogenic Queen's Gambit moment, um, he finds my giraffe, which is absolutely incredible. So then we have this narrative that as you came on to talk about the Mediterranean, we're now in South Africa, and there's two of these larger panels, let's get panels with lots of animals and therianthrope figures in Iberia. One is Strait of Gibraltar, the other is El Castillo Cave in the north of Spain. The Strait of Gibraltar one, the Gorham's etching, overlaps with the South African one. It actually, the same animals in the same order with the same lines. They actually lay them on top. It's on my webpage, beforeryan.com. They actually overlap. So, which is fascinating story. So the story of prehistory is not that we are out of Africa. We came out of Africa, but rather there was cultural exchange 34,000 years ago between Europe and South Africa, presumably through at least the coastal side of West Africa. Completely different story. And going back to this lost civilization thing of Atlantis, and I'm not I'm not in Graham Hancock's team Atlantis game, but Plato said that the Atlanteans covered the entire length of Africa, the entire length, and that they. So what probably happened is that the team Plato had seen these images in the caves of Iberia, and they'd seen the giraffes. Okay, and they recognized that there were no giraffes in Europe. It just wasn't a thing at that time. So therefore, the giraffes had to be in Africa. They didn't know how far south in Africa this thing went, but they realized it had to be Africa, and that's how the Plato narration of Atlantis came up with Africa. So Plato was sort of half right. And Lee Berger brought the images forward. Now, people will say it's a long way from the Iberian Peninsula, Strait of Gibraltar, or North Spain to South Africa. Here's a side story. So I wrote about Biological Time in 2004, and about a year later, I got a letter. It was a letter and email from a woman named Fiona Campbell. Fiona was an FY, and Fiona said that she loved the book and she was going to live it for a year. She was going to live this experience of living of being in the rhythms of the plants and animals in her world in Scotland. And I thought this woman just nuts. So I didn't answer it. I just I just let it go. I let it go, and it's fair. It's fair. And so a year and a half later, I get a book in the mail, and she talks about living for a whole year with the rhythms of the plants and the animals. And so then I Googled her. Okay, who is Fiona Campbell? Well, Fiona Campbell was the first woman who had walked across all continents around the world. So this concept of it's too far from Iberian Peninsula to South Africa is total bunk because Fiona went around all the continents in the world. And in the book, it's kind of fun. In her book's interesting. She read into some things that I talked about the salmon coming together to spawn around the full moon, and I talked about new moon, full moon activity of different animals. And what she said, which I did not say, is that full moon was time to have sex in a cave. And so apparently, based on her book, she and her friends had sex in the cave around the full moon. And she went on to, and this is the God's honest truth. Okay? So this is not humor. This is serious stuff. Okay. So for the rest of her life, Fiona, the walker, the world walker, she set up a school to teach people to do the same thing, how to live off the land, but not just go out and pick what's there, but know what in advance what to pick and what to harvest, especially at the seashore. And presumably they're still having sex around the full moon. And that was the narration of her book. And she went on to write another book later, was also fascinating as well. So I have one fan in the world, and that's Fiona Campbell,
Wow.
who lived the dream.
Well, let's make it two. I thought you were going to tell me that Fiona Campbell was like the granddaughter of Joseph Campbell for a second, and you're just going to blow my mind. The that is interesting, and I'm gonna have to check. I'm gonna have to check her workout because
Fiona FY.
Okay. So it's that's how you spell Fiona, Fyona.
Yeah, FYO. And she has many books because she wrote as she was walking around all the continents. She was writing books.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
She's an old school explorer. And or like the naturalist, right? Or who'd go out and it would just write all the things that they would encounter along the way, in like
On
little.
Muir, Darwin, Jane Goodall is a naturalist, yeah. As is George Schaller, the world's foremost wildlife biologist, sees himself as a naturalist because he didn't see it as going to the field and start, pick up a chimpanzee and see how much it weighed. He was looking at the relational dynamics between the animals. And so what George brought to the picture is not just identifying animals. I had no idea what they were, but George brought this sensitivity of the animals. And so there was a picture, there's an image of an Iberian lynx with the kitten pushing up against the rough, like an Iberian lynx because it has a big hair coming down here on its chin. And I was into that time in the biological time perspective, George, what time of the year, blank blank. And George like, let's leave that aside. It's a tender scene. I've never seen that scene with Iberian lynx, he said, but I've seen that tender scene with lions in the Serengeti. And that was so George brought this sense of sensitivity to the work. And it brought out that these people are animists. These are people not slaying the Iberian lynx and the giraffes and the lions and everything else. These are people that they were their brothers, sisters, cousins, uncles, and the whole thing. They're animists. These are people that believe that or not believe, but their world was that the wind had a voice, and we see the wind of an anthropologic figure in some of these images. We see the wind, um, that the mountains had a spirit, and we see the mountains. We see the mountains with paranoid animals all over them, and that's what the animist is.
That's really
Are
cool
you an
stuff.
animist, Ryan?
you know
Are you a
um
wannabe animist? A wannabe?
I mean, if you know considering that I'm not going to sit here and act like I have a full comprehension of what it means, but I believe I'm into it. I had to giraffes are my number one, lizards are my number one as well. And I do believe that animals have a lot more going on than people give them credit for, as far as consciousness, awareness, and intelligence and things like that. But um, I so I don't know, but I probably do want to be one. Can we break it down a little more specifically?
So big news in our household is we had twins. Okay, we had twins, and so you're supposed to like clap, right?
Oh wait,
It's
you
regular.
had twins or you are twins?
Well, we have twins. We have twins, and
Oh, okay, okay.
the name Timber, Timber and Thorn, which are the two Portland MLS soccer teams. Actually, one's men's soccer team and women's soccer team. So Timber and Thorn, and they're both orphans. They're both orphans, and and they were found in Alaska. They were orphans roaming around without mother bear. And they were brought down to the Oregon Zoo, where they became the Portland Zoo, Oregon Zoo, where they became a part of the family. And so we gave them, people of Portland or the zookeeper, somebody gave them these human names, not just human names, but names of the soccer teams. That is our link to animism. We can't walk away from it. Every time that we turn on Disney, and look at Donald Duck and Mickey Mouse, we don't question whether a mouse can talk. Okay, we just don't do that. But it's because it will lose the story. Or that was it Cinderella who had the birds and the bunnies help her clean the house. Um, the
It was either
castle, I
her or
guess.
Snow White, or
It's
it's
like
all tied into that.
it's
And
all
it
time.
is, yeah, there is something, whenever I find myself being, maybe like in the past years ago, I'd be annoyed by, like, we had a quote unquote problem, right? And there was these flies that just we couldn't get rid of the flies. And then I just started naming the flies.
That's
And
right.
and as soon as I named the flies, I totally transitioned away from swatting at them to leaving little grains of sugar out for them, or a little crumb here and there. It totally changed my perspective of the fly, of the creature, when it had a name. For some reason, it totally shifted my point of view.
So George Schaller told me a story, and he actually was a word reporter. So George Schaller when he was in the Serengeti, the family adopted a orphan bear lion cub, and they named the lion cub. I think it was Simba or something like that. Um, and ultimately, the lion got too big to stay around. This is like a born free story, right? It's a true story. It got too big, and so they had to send it off to a zoo because it couldn't survive in the wild, and it was too big for their tents because they were living in tents. So George said, "Don't name the animals." Well, we broke that rule, didn't we? You and I broke the
Yeah,
rule,
yeah, we definitely
and I
100%
didn't
did.
break that rule until you we made the gentleman's agreement on a podcast. And I've only broken it one other time, and it was somebody who recognized an animal I hadn't seen. It was an ostrich, and we named it after, I believe, his daughter. And so I've broken the rule, George's rule, twice.
Oh my
But
gosh, I mean, I feel even more honored that the name Marjorie for the giraffe is even going against the great George Schaller's wishes.
it
Uh,
absolutely is, yeah, yeah, and
yeah,
for good reason because we become attached to the animals. And George, his family situation, it didn't go down well. It's like giving away your child. So that's animism. When that animal becomes part of your family and you have that feeling for that, you feed the sugar to the flies. Flies don't live that long, right? They only live a few weeks, right? So you're naming, if that you did that for more than a few weeks, you were naming other flies as
generations of
generations of
flies.
flies. Yeah.
And the one constant was the man who provides the sweet. Like that was my god name to the flies. As
That's right.
we
Yes,
went
you
from
be
friends to now I'm deifying myself to the flies. But that was a big jeep. That was a big jump rather quickly. Actually, it was kind of scary, but that is interesting though, that the connection that we have with the world around us, with the other animals and the animal species or animal creatures, I believe is the phrase
Mhm.
um, that we were using last time, is it's a profound part of our existence. And as soon as we disconnect from our connectivity to all things around us, we separate ourselves to our detriment, right?
Absolutely. But not just the animals. From the animals, it's the river, it's the wind, it's the mountains. So to take away the mountain from an animistic person, indigenous people along those lines, is to take away their being itself. And you remember, I'm not sure if you knew the story, the continuous story of Mauna Kea and the Big Island of Hawaii, is that they want the astronomers, which I'm pro astronomy, pro big astronomy, right? Um, they want there's a big 30 meter telescope going up. Huge project's been going up for about 10 years. Well, Mauna Kea is like sacred ground. It is the Vatican of the indigenous people of Hawaii. And they would traditionally go up to the mountain to see the stars, just as the same way the astronomers want to do. And that was their connection to the great beyond. But once you put that 30-meter telescope up there, it changed the perspective. Okay. And not only did it change perspective for the indigenous peoples, the Hawaiians, but they were renaming their stars. They're renaming their night sky away from the mythical narratives that the Hawaiians had towards replacing them with Greeks, replacing with the Greek narratives. And so what we do in our present scientific way of thinking is in our normal course of actions, we take away the animism. If you could look out behind me, you would see Mount Hood behind through the windows. Well, Mount Hood was not the original name, of course. The Native Americans was Wai'is, and they had a mythical narrative, a sacred narrative about how the two mountains fought with each other over a girl, and of course they could paint St. Helens and dammed up the river and the coyote and the salmon and saves the world. So that when you change the name for a mountain, give it especially some Indian slayer, which is the worst thing to do. When you change that name, you're taking away somebody's humanity, their basic animism, being of who they are.
Wow. And I mean, I'm fully on board with animism, as it turns out. We're going to do a quick break here. When we come back, we're going to talk more with my guy Bernie Taylor. I mean, yeah, I didn't never know where the conversation is going to go, but I always know it's going to be incredibly fascinating and educational and interesting. And just as a reminder, patrons, patreon.com/Ryan Singer, you can get no commercials for $3 a month. So pop on over there and join the Patreon community, which is great over there. So we'll be right back with Bernie. Okay, so for the patrons, we didn't really go anywhere, but for everybody else, we're back. So, uh, Bernie, I want to talk about neurodiversity a little bit, and because it seems like that's been. Is it accurate to say that it's been kind of a focus of, or at least an area of interest for you in your recent works? I want to kind of catch up on like what you've really been focusing on lately with your research and all your work.
So neurodiversity, I did. Um, it's been something I've been working on for 20 or more years. And people and concepts keep falling into place. So, for example, Steven Spielberg failed in film school. I think it was University of California or something like that. But what Steven Spielberg had was that didn't work so well in the classroom environment, but worked well in the film environment, was that he could see the picture. He saw the film before it was done. He could direct the storyboard makers of something that was in his mind. Okay? And that's what Picasso did. Or any great artist, or any great, even a great photographers. Great photographer does not look in the camera to see the picture. Great photographer already sees the picture in his head. And when we traveled around northern Spain, we traveled with Alejandro. He was our guide. He was our documentarian. He was the translator. He was the whole thing. And he calls himself a polymath. So he produces music. He makes film. He shoots pictures. When he shoots pictures, he walks around with the camera at his chest. So he never looks through the lens. Part of it, I think that he can't see it. He can't see at distances. That's from our driving experiences. I don't think he could see distances. Okay, I'm going to tell you that. And we so we were pointing out signs. We're going to go this way and that way. But he would shoot from his chest, and he would shoot pictures of people in their like moments. Like they don't know he's shooting the picture because he doesn't put it up camera up to his face. Okay, and so that is a you can't learn to do that. Okay, it has to be something that's in you. And same way that Picasso's father was an artist, and Pele's father was a professional soccer player, and Mickey Mantle's father was a professional ball player. I mean, it's either in you or it's not in you. Um, and so you have friends that they can go, they can take out a sketchboard and actually they can walk outside, come back in the house and sketch out what they've seen. I mean, you probably don't have too many friends that can do that, but you have friends in the comedian world that they can hear two or three jokes and they can tell that joke, string it out for a whole hour. Most people can't do that. Can you do that?
You know, well, it's funny because I do have a lot of friends, and sometimes when we're all together, there's a certain group of friends of mine. When we're all together, it's nonstop street jokes being told
Yeah.
back and forth. I cannot remember a street joke to save my life.
Okay.
So I just kind of sit there and listen.
Yeah.
But no, but as far as like the retelling of a story, or experiencing something and then an hour later doing 10 minutes about it on stage, something that just occurred, yeah, that is a thing that certain comedians and a lot of us will do.
What about Gilgamesh and the great narratives, Beowulf? They were not written down for the speaker. They were memorized. So Beowulf was told for 2 or 3 days before it concluded. And there was a rhythm, there was a rhyme, and there was a way that was done, that there was repetition, but still people could do that for days. How many people today have that ability? I mean, I don't know what anybody can do that. I have a friend, actually a friend from the past I haven't seen for a long, long time. And I ran to a mutual friend of ours yesterday, and he wrote a book, and he started in the book telling his life story from the first word, and he ended at the last word. No edits. Just went through this whole book. Even the editors of the press didn't even edit it. How many people can just tell this mass on this book? No, sorry. And there's very few people have these skills, and the people that who embrace their skills as opposed to try to have somebody else's abilities, they can be very successful in life. In the case of Steven Spielberg, in the case of Picasso, and of course in the case of Pele. I had a Pele. I'm going to tell you, I had a Pele moment. I grew up in New York metro area, And Pele played for the Cosmos. Um, we went to the game, and Pele came out of the hole, whatever they called it. And I was the first one to say, I said, yeah, Pele, Pele. And he looked up and he saw me and he waved. So we kind of have that connection, Pele.
You connected with Pele,
We
which
connected,
is
yeah, a deep connection.
deep connection.
It's not like the connection you have with your flies over a period of time,
No, 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 no. You
but it was
didn't try
deep
to get
connection with Pele.
you didn't try to get
Pele.
Pele to worship you as the all powerful sustainer of life. The when it comes to like the work that you've done, and because Before Orion's been out now for a few years,
Yeah,
and we talked a little bit about like the responses and the email. You'd wake up at 7 in the morning and you'd see you had an email sent to you at like 3 or 4 a.m. and you're like, oh,
yeah,
I think I know what this is going to be like.
yeah. I'm sorry, that person was sacked, was also who was sacked from the individual's educational program, PhD program.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was because the person years later, people have seen my work. That individual never put together the pieces on the person's own, and was dumped from the program. One of the most famous paleoanthropologists in the world, was just because that individual missed what was I laid out.
Yeah, I'm curious now about like the status of what you've laid out. And
Yeah, good question. Good question. Yeah. So COVID changed a lot. When COVID happened, these big academic conferences went virtual. They went online. And so conferences that were in Rome and Bulgaria, and Turkey, that were not accessible before, just because I didn't have the wherewithal to go to these places, or I can go like one or two per year, and that was my vacation. Um, they went virtual, and so I started to go virtually to these conferences. And the first conference I went to was an art history conference in the UK, and art historians will believe anything, because that's our art is just created, right? Okay, so um, but the second conference I did was a major astronomy conference. It was in Chile, but it was worldwide, and I had pushback. I had a lot of pushback, and somebody did not want me to speak, and I knew who that somebody was. Okay, because it doesn't, you can figure it out. And someone stepped in, and his name was Jay Pashikoff. Jay was he passed on last year, but he was the world's expert on eclipses, and he wrote everybody who's a professional or a serious amateur has Jay Pashikoff's books, because he's the guy, he's the man. So Jay stepped in and says, "I want to hear this guy." He wanted to hear this guy. And so they said, "Well, we're not going to let him speak." And they said, "We'll let him do a poster." I had a great poster. It helped me consolidate a lot of images into, poster. And that really worked for me. That was awesome. And then I started going to more conferences. And after about COVID was maybe 2 years, 2.5 years. After 3 years, I presented more than 20 conferences in astronomy, archaeology, anthropology, mythology, art history, psychology of religion. Um, I mean, it's a long list of and these are all major conferences. And I went from being, pushed back to get into the conference. And the last conference I did last was in like September of previous year. People clapped, and they didn't clap for any other speaker in that conference except me. And so it was a major shift from, um, you know, the guy that's not in the room, who's not in our world, to the guy that we are now applauding this guy. Now, there's something very interesting about the audience, that none of them was Spanish. There are a bunch of Portuguese in that audience. And Portugal is not a very big country. And I don't mean to demean the Portuguese in any way, because they are a big people. Okay. But it's just not a big country, part of the Iberian Peninsula. It's a sliver. It's a peel off the orange. The the Portuguese perspective is they want to understand the spirituality in the archaeology, whereas the Spanish are still tied in the world of Franco and Catholicism from almost 100 years ago. Okay. Spain is a Catholic country, but it's not a kumbaya, banjo Catholicism. It's Genesis Catholicism. And so when somebody says they want to talk about spirituality in the archaeology, well, that just throws in the face of Genesis. And what happened in 1930s is that Spain had a civil war, and that's the story of Guernica. And of course, Franco is joined by the two other big fascists in Italy and Germany. Right? And they teamed up with the Catholic Church. There's nobody, Catholics don't want to talk about this. International Catholics don't want to talk about this. I have a good Catholic friend. He's a priest. And he says, I would love to hear about more good Catholic priests during the time of Franco. But what they did was they trapped their history or trapped their prehistory in Genesis. And so Spain is still a country of Genesis. It's still a country of obedience, patriarchy. If you go to the caves, there's three things: there's animals, there's humans, and there's geometric symbols nobody's ever going to understand. But the Portuguese, they want to know about the spirituality. They see spirituality in rock art all around the world. How can it not? The only place not be Iberia in Spain? Totally impossible. And so it was the Portuguese and other non-Spanish who clapped. Because there's this question out there, this big question out there is who owns history? And so you go into the internet, the podcast, you hear different sides. I love Grant Hancock, I hate Grant Hancock, I love archaeologists, I hate archaeologists, whatever it is, right? What they're doing is they're asking the question of who owns history, or in my case, the interpretation of prehistory. Who has that domain? Is it the country where it's domiciled, where the caves are? Is it the person who first went to print with a peer-reviewed journal? Is it the conquering country in the case of the British, which conquered most of the imperialist world and brought back all the loot to the British Museum in London? You might have been there. So do the British own it? Because they have all the artifacts. Do the indigenous peoples own the history? Is it their right to have the sole interpretation? Are there sacred narratives the source, the end source of it all? So what in fact is who owns history? Who owns the interpretation of prehistory? I don't think the Spanish do, just because it's on their land. But what's happening in the world is that it's a lot of politics, and most archaeology is nationalistic. If I want to go do an excavation in Spain or Egypt or anywhere, I can't do it without getting permission from the central government. It could be the county, the province, or it could be, Madrid. But that's not just in Spain, that's anywhere in the world. Okay. Except the United States, where you can pretty much go take pictures and, say anything that it is, right? You can see, Bigfoot, right? Prime example. So I don't have I'm breaking the establishment of who owns prehistory. And by me telling this entirely different version of prehistory as everybody's been fed, it ruffled a lot of feathers, and it continues to do so. But the Portuguese like it. The Americans like it. The French love it because they want to see how the Iberians missed it, the Spanish missed it, or they covered it up. The French just absolutely love this. And so there's nationalistic archaeology that's tied up in religion, date to Genesis in the case of the Spanish, where you can't talk about spirituality in the same sentence as archaeology. But they formally, or they have some of the oldest rock art and cave art in the world that has these stories, these narratives from deep in time. But they were closed because of this nationalist archaeology. Now, this is all good for me because it was just sitting there waiting for me to it's there. All I had to do was match the images in these caves to other people in ancient times, in the case of the Greeks and astronomy. So I'm no genius. I mean, all I did was say, there's the positive space and there's the negative space. And you put the two together, you have a story, you have a narrative. That's what I did, which isn't rocket science. And then I compared it with people in the ancient world to see how it matched up. And of course, it matches up 100%. And now it matches up with South Africa, which is absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, I definitely have to check this out. And it strikes me how precious we are, and with just in general as an animal, about our beliefs, our ownership, this idea of I don't know where that comes from. This idea of this desire to own something, and this is mine, right? I'm sure it comes from fear of death and safety, and all that kind of stuff.
It's post-animist. It's completely post-animist. So Native Americans who are animists, they would say, you can walk across our land because we don't own this land. You can drink from our rivers because we don't own the river. You can breathe our air because the air is free. So these are ownership is a post-animist concept.
Yeah, and I guess so. I guess it, it kind of, I guess it bleeds into anything, and everything that, whatever the viewpoint is, right? Whatever the overarching philosophy of governance, or of religion, or of belief in general, it affects literally everything that stems out from it or beneath it, I suppose, right? And if the, what would be the opposite of animist? Humanist,
No,
or
well, so humanist is to say that they're or secular humanists, as I'm not a religious humanist, would say that I choose what happens in my world. So a deity does not take cancer away from me. I hire a doctor to take cancer from me. Okay, that's a humanistic view. It's a non-deity or non-spiritual view. So what would be the opposite of an animist? Well, capitalism is clearly the opposite of animism, because capitalism defines ownership of property, and that's not just a property of the laptop and the Yeti mic in front of me, but also ideas. So intellectual property. Um, Capitalism owns thoughts, owns ideas.
yeah, I guess that's, it's wild. And as a creative type person, as someone who considers himself in the world of the artist, it is, intellectual property is all we got for the most part. And there, in the world of comedy, there's fights. Well, that's my joke. No, you stole my joke. Blah 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 blah. Blah. Right? It's like, but if you just stand back and you listen to that sentence, it's pretty funny. Like, you stole my joke. It's like that's pretty funny sentence to get really bent out of shape about it. But I mean, there's careers that have been built on stolen intellectual property in the world of comedy. We don't have to get into that, but this isn't a podcast about taking down the comedy hacks, but it's weird that in a world where we have such access to information, and maybe it makes sense too, but it is strange to me that the availability of new information that can, it's not necessarily about changing a perspective as much as widening and enriching our experience. And specifically in the case of, the Gallery of Discs and the El Castillo Cave, and what you've discovered and what you've unearthed, and which has been, proven to show out time and time again now for the handful of years since the book has been released.
Mm.
It enriches our experience, and it brings us closer to, the ancient past, and therefore makes us more well-rounded in our experience of life when we understand the experiences of those who lived 40,000 years before us.
Absolutely. It humbles us in many ways. Now, Picasso is an interesting perspective on this. So Picasso, we know one layer of Guernica, which is the destruction of the vast town of Guernica during the Spanish Civil War. I mean, that's established. If you go to the Sophia Regina Sophia Museum in Madrid, you listen to the audio and they say, well, there's many perspectives of competing perspectives about Guernica. No, there's one layer, because it's political. It's a political statement. But if you understand or start to study these Pale Cave images, you see that what Picasso drew from them. So Picasso he has the bull. Well, the bull is Franco. I mean, has this big wide forehead and the same chin as Franco. So he's mocking Franco as the bull. But Franco was the bull. Anywhere you go in Spain, you see these huge Franco bulls all over the place. Well, he also the bull's head is actually chopped off. It's on a cutting block in the barn, which is interesting. So Picasso was seeing that the bull is Franco, the bull of brutality, but the destiny is to chop off the head. He sees the hero is Orion, which relationship is Orion to Taurus, Taurus being the bull. Okay, but the exact same relationship, and he sees Orion as the fallen hero. But it's exactly the same as the constellations as he would have seen them in the night sky from Paris, looking towards Guernica. And on the other end of the panel, you see that it looks like a burning barrel, but it's actually a bear. It's a bear, and it's a cubist bear. And coming out of this cubist bear was his first wife, Olga, and she was a ballerina. So you see her doing her thing, okay, the ballerina thing, right? But you could probably do it. You're a practiced comedian. You could probably do it better than I just did the ballerina thing. But so
We're gonna give you a
you see
pass on that
Olga.
one. We're gonna give you a pass on
Okay,
the ballerina, the
you see
pirouette.
Olga, the Russian ballerina coming out. So on one side of the panel we have the communists, and the other side of the panel we have the fascists. Interesting. And in the middle is the horse, which Picasso said was the Spanish people. Okay. So what Picasso did was he took the politics of the time and he looked at the cave images and he integrated the animistic perspective on Guernica. That's brilliant. I mean, it's absolutely amazing. But if you talk to any art historian before have not seen my work, they have some like fancy words for whatever. I mean, they say something different. But what they're missing is the essence of animism that Picasso picked up in the caves, which gives us an entirely different perspective on people from our time and how they project things into the world. Picasso is the underworld of the cave. He integrates that into the bomb Guernica, which has all the cast of characters, um, and that are projected as animals that are also in the night skies constellations. So you can't understand Picasso and what he found in the caves, because he was an early one of the caves, without understanding where he came from and what he saw, what came to his mind. Picasso was brilliant, I mean, extraordinary brilliant, not because of any artistic technique he had, but rather that he recognized the components, he put them together into this montage. And people go into the museums now and they're like, oh, wow, I see Picasso. I'm going to do a selfie with Picasso. And there's multiple layers of Picasso and nobody really knows. Well, we can start with one layer and we can work from there. And why nobody says that Boris Picasso is Franco with the head cut off is because they're still stuck in this post-Franco paradigm.
Wow. I mean, it's as someone who strives to create lasting art, it's absolutely mind blowing. And we're going to talk more with. We're going to do another quick little break here because I think I'm not sure how long we've been recording, but we're just going to do a quick break here. So just another little commercial break. We're going to be back with author Bernie Taylor. Oh my God. What are we going to get into next? So patreon.com/Ryan Singer, $3 a month gets you no commercials. We'll be right back. Okay, we're back. We're talking about Picasso and the absolute brilliance of being able to, being able to incorporate and infuse all these different things. And as an artist, we love layers. And even in paranormal investigation, I love layers. Like, it's one thing to catch something on camera. If you can catch that same thing on multiple different devices, it gives more value to that moment in time, right? And when you're talking about art, it kind of mirrors that. If you can have layers and deep meaning, and that's what I love about certain. I was just having a conversation with this about a friend of mine. It's about the meaning that we can derive and the connections we create and the connections we uncover and dig up in certain pieces of art or work that, for me, it's something I feel inside my body where it connects me to it. And I have such a deep love and interest for anyone who clearly has discovered something or created something that I never would have gotten to, or at least in my estimation, right?
Absolutely. So in the chamber or the gallery, we have Guernica, which is brilliant, of course. We find images from Dali. And of course, people are like, well, Dali's crazy, right? And Dali said that the only difference between a crazy man and me is I'm not crazy. But that's a Dali. You can use the joke. It's not my joke, but it's a joke. Okay. It's not. It's a Dali said that. Okay. I didn't make it up. So in that chamber is I think it's oil painting, the Enigma of the Invisible Man. And then Enigma of the Invisible Man is layers. I mean, lots of layers. And one layer you see this invisible this man. It's kind of like the thinker sort of thing. And but then you see a sailboat in the foreground, and then you see a perfume, the top of a perfume bottle that kind of looks like lips, or the perfume bottle of that time, not like Chanel today. Of that time looks like lips, and you see the eyes and this sort of like background. I want you to realize that he has integrated these people into the hills. The hills are the people. Very animistic. In just the same way as the Native Americans did here. So he has these multiple layers, the multiple layers. So I started investigating where did he get the pieces from. And it's obvious it's a seashore. You see the sailing boat. And actually, the sailing boat is in the glasses of the female character that has the perfume bottle nose, lips. Well, the origin story of that one is that it's like Marilyn's chamber or Marilyn's room in the Dolly's home museum. Is that there was a bedroom, and he put all these characters in the foreground and the background, and two windows. Sorry, two pictures became the eyes, which become the glasses on the character in the visible person, and the perfume bottle that became the lips was to give Marilyn Monroe's lips, voluptuous lips. And there's other characters around the room. So what he did is that was his first part of that. And then what he did was how he got the idea, and then he superimposed those over mountains. So he created the same sort of images, the positive, negative space with the layers as we found Upper Pillar cave art. So I started looking, do I know this image somewhere? So I could not find a representation that he borrowed that like Picasso directly borrowed characters. I mean, he lifted them. I couldn't find that from Dolly, but he clearly had that concept. And prior to that, he had other images that he borrowed pareidolia of rocks that became, actually one is Don Quixote on the horse, and so he had the same concept. But where did Dali get that from? I don't, maybe he got it from Picasso, but maybe he recognized in the natural world around him, maybe he had been to the caves as well and saw these concepts. So modern art is nothing modern about it. Modern art started with Picasso and Les Demoiselles d'Avignon in 1907. The one with the masks, these grotesque masks. Well, those two masks come directly out of the Altamira cave. There's no differentiation between them. So Picasso he lifted directly and put them onto other characters in his time. There's actually outside the Altamira Museum is really interesting. There's a banner, and it's like 4 foot long, and it's got Picasso's face on it, and it says Desperacitio, which means basically wanted, right? It means why wanted, and and under that he says for if you have information, call these phone numbers. Picasso is not represented in the Altamira Museum, even though he lifted from the Altamira Museum. It's a cry for help from the director of the Altamira Museum. So the local power brokers don't want to represent Picasso in there, partly because an American figured this out. The other part of it is they don't like Picasso because of the politics. They're still stuck in Franco politics. Franco Picasso were diametrically opposed. Picasso said he'd never go back to he never allowed Guernica in Spain until Franco was dead. In fact, that's what happened. Um, not well, because Franco would have burned the thing up because he sees his face in the bowl with the head cut off, right? He obviously would have burned it. So there's a struggle in Spain itself over Picasso, and so the cry for help from the museum director, who's on Team Bernie, is to put out this Picasso's missing. How do we find Picasso when it's in the face of the power the politics, the lead archaeologist in the area who's like he obviously missed it, and if you miss things, it's okay, you just got to move on. But the narrative of the educational narrative in Spain is that Picasso did great art, but none of it's political, and none of it all came out of Picasso's head, and we are in the community that studies these things in the caves would have seen it if there was such a thing. Um,
Yeah,
but yeah,
that's amazing.
Desperacito. You can put that as a sign for your next gig. Ryan Singer, Desperacito. And so what I
Yeah.
do is I switched my it's on my webpage. I switched my image with Picasso's. So I'm really the Desperacito in this thing. It's not Picasso. And
Where is Bernie? The well, it's interesting because there's so much going on all the time, right? And when you really dig into anything, and just because of the nature of us being alive and everything, all of these houses that we live in now have been built on the houses on built on the houses built on the houses
mm,
of those who have come before us.
mhm.
And so the digger we deep, the more basements and the more living rooms, and then the more basements and the more living rooms and the more basements and living, we just keep digging down and down and down. We can find so much meaning, we can find so many connections because it all started somewhere. And for me, that's part of the beauty of being alive, is that it's a never ending quest, searching for meaning. I want to read one of your quotes real quick, Bernie, and it's myths are passed through the seasons of the night sky as constellations and stars, projecting man's psyche into the cosmos. Characters that are light years from Earth, but still within the grasp of the human imagination. And this seems inspired and ties into the constellations being mirrored in the cave art and El Castillo
Mhm.
cave, and what we're talking about here with the negative space and the positive space, and then you examine them together and you have a story and you have art and you have meaning that can be found, and lessons that can be learned, initiations are had, or gone upon or gone through or experienced. And we know, okay, so I'm going to stop myself from saying that sentence. What I was going to say was we know all this. But so now we have this understanding of this, right, from 35, 40,000 years ago. And you've uncovered this incredible story, the hero's journey through the cave art. And I'd like to think that we can't ever really get anywhere until we know where we came from.
Absolutely. Well, what you just said something when you read my quote. I recognize that you are one of my two great fans. Of course, Fiona Campbell, who walked around the world, and now the Lord of Flies, Ryan Singer. Um, so I fully appreciate your reading my quote. And you're right. You're right. Unless we recognize where we came from, we can never recognize where we're going or even who we are. And that's the story of Plato and Eudoxus, the Greeks who borrow this from the Egyptians. They recognize this was a major point in their own history, that there was a huge history before them and a huge history, especially before the ancient Egyptians, because Egyptians say we didn't invent this, we didn't discover any of this stuff. We brought this came from someplace else. Okay. And so we psychologically we can't break from the archetypes that we live in. I mean, we just we live in an archetypal matrix where there's heroes and there's villains and there's teachers and there's apprentices and there's mothers and there's children. These are all there's mountains of faith. There are rivers of transformation. These we can't break away from that. We choose we're going to go through this door or that door, but in the end we're psychologically entrained. Okay. And so what we have to realize is that this is not since Joseph Campbell or Young before him or whoever was before them. We've recognized this throughout time. This is this is fundamental to our consciousness. We've got it 34,000 years ago on the Iberian Peninsula. We have it 30, I would say the same time period in South Africa. And we find these same concepts, these same archetypal characters around the world, both as the hero and the apprentice, the constellations in the night sky, and the cosmic mountains, the river of transformation, the whole thing. We find these all around the world. Therefore, there must have been an origin point of these that was truly our humanity. Our humanity was not when we learned how to, you know, chip a piece of stone to make a knife or a blade. Our humanity is when we recognize that there's something beyond ourselves, that there's all the pieces fit together, and that the earth, the underworld, the terrestrial plane, the night sky are all the same. That was our humanity, because that's when we developed spirituality. We there were different names for the deities, okay, if there even were deities, but that was that's the matrix, the archetypal matrix that we're still walking around in. And without that archetypal matrix, we can't understand our own world. I mean, you know who the villain is. I mean, you and but we have to realize that the hero on his journey is in the other side of the door of the villain entering the room. There's two sides to every coin on that. But we truly know the person comes to the door, they're telling my, kids what to do, they're the villain, you know. Um, but that same person is spreading their own truth. But we can't escape this archetypal matrix, and that's what Picasso put into his art. We see into the cave art, um, and without recognizing that this is fundamentally part of us. This didn't come around through capitalism. It didn't come around through the revolutions of the last century. This is, or the genius, alleged genius of the Greeks, or the monuments of the Egyptians before them. This is something that's been around for a very long period of time. And so we're literally looking in the mirror and we're seeing ourselves. We're seeing animists. We're seeing people talk to flies, who relate your brothers and sisters with bears, and name them Timbers and Thorn here in Portland. We took in the orphan bears. So we it's part of who we are, inescapable.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And it's, when I can't help but just be so in awe of the world around us when I talk with you. And it's a real gift, I think, that you're giving people to kind of, center us in the moment of now by expanding one's awareness of the vast past. It's really, really cool stuff. And, it's, I wonder, I'm obsessed with where are we going? Where are we headed? Right. And I think
Mm.
about, and I think a lot of people are nowadays, and everybody's the hero or the villain. And, we're so quickly to label someone the villain nowadays, and, proclaim ourselves the hero in many ways. But, and I think we all can suffer from that. Um, but at the end of the day, I wonder, from your perspective, we'll wrap up with this thought here. This has been a great chat. I can't wait to, there's no way I'm waiting 6 years to try to get you on the show again. But the when you think about what we know from this past now, and this, and how it's always been in us to understand this, and, to be psychologically entrained, and but there, I think it's something that we know that we have to do. Like, you have that quote about, the anxious hero, he knows they have to
Mm.
answer the call, right? and
Mm-hmm.
and so it's that confronting fear to
Mm-hmm.
overcome for the greater good, and of ourself and the community. um, do you think that there's any evidence of where we're headed now that you have uncovered, a big part of our past?
So how does the story end? So I'm not a cataclysmist or person the sky's going to fall, but someday, it's not tomorrow, it's not next year, it's not 1,000 or even 20,000, 100,000 years. Someday we're going to lose electricity. It's going to happen because we live in a very violent universe, and we cannot predict when and where it's going to happen, but it's going to happen. And someday, our heirs, if you have kids, I don't know if you do, we or maybe your niece or nephew will throw that one. Okay. Okay. Uh, the heirs of our families will be sitting around a campfire, and we have lost everything that all this that we have now. And they're going to look into the night sky, and they're going to say, "I used to know a story about bears. Could that be the bear in the night sky? Could that be the hero on his journey?" And people will go back into these caves, and they're going to look. Oh, there's a bear. I know that bear in the night sky, and there's a hero on his journey, and that looks like a giraffe. But how could a giraffe be in a Spanish cave? Okay. I'm going to put together the night sky in the same way as I did, all these pieces. So how does the story end? Is that the story is going to end that we will be back in some sort of Paleolithic situation, because we're going to lose all electricity and everything's going to be melted down, and there will be survivors. And those survivors will be around the campfires. They can tell stories instead of being on podcasts and telling stories. They're going to do it face to face in the light of the fire and the stars above them. That's how the story ends. The story will be another beginning, and it'll be over and over and over again, because we live in this archetypal matrix, and we live in a very violent cosmos that we cannot control. So we're on the canoe floating down the stream. Um,
That's
that
interesting.
is our that's our
That's our
that's our
fate.
eternity.
And, it makes me think of this image of people, these descendants living that way in a Paleolithic type, situation around a campfire. And I just imagine they're all just gonna kind of sit around and be like, doesn't this all kind of seem familiar?
Exactly. Yeah.
Have we been here before? um, and hopefully, I mean, because when we talk about lost civilizations, and with that, a lot of the knowledge was lost, but some of it was passed down through, through oral traditions
Mhm.
and things like that. So, I mean, there's this book called Hamlet's Mill that's all about that,
I read that. Yeah.
and anyway, it is fascinating to think about, like, okay, we've got these stories, and someday our descendants will understand what these stories truly mean, because they'll reach a point of, I don't know, intelligence or intellect or whatever, or curiosity. But okay, well, it's all really, really fascinating stuff. And let's remind people where they can find, Biological Time and Before Orion. Is it at beforeorion.com? Is that the best place to
Before
go
I
for you?
comment, is the center of it all.
Okay.
And from
And
there, the links and videos and conferences, and I wrote papers, and it's my brainchild.
yeah, and it's the YouTube channel is
It's all linked.
kicking
Yeah.
it. It's all there. Okay, so last question, I promise. In our first conversation, you said this is the last book I'll ever write. Is that still true? 6 years later, is Before Orion the last book you're going to write?
The last big book I write.
Oh,
But before Orion actually started as a paper for a journal, and then it became this huge fun. So I'm gonna say it's the last big book I write. I'm
okay.
gonna tell you right now, it'll be the last book I write that has images in it, because you just put the images on the internet. You don't have to. So, you know, maybe something more like we talked about today, conversation versus a book, because books don't last forever. Um, and certainly, podcasts are not going to last forever. We don't, who knows in 100 years what the medium will be. Everything we do now it'll be lost.
Yeah,
Um, and
potentially.
so what is, so, maybe I'll, find a cave and I'll scratch it on the wall and tell my journey of self-discovery.
Oh wow. I'm gonna start. I'm gonna get. Do you think Zillow has a cave button I can click? Uh, I'm not looking for lots of land. I'm looking for cave. Okay. Well,
Yeah.
Bernie, this has been amazing. Thanks again for sharing your time and your thoughts, and your discoveries with me and with the listeners. I know they're gonna love this chat when we put it out. So thanks again. What a pleasure to see you. Always so much fun chatting with you.
Thank you, Ryan. Another great day to you.